Is John McWhorter's new book, Woke Racism, provocative just for the sake of being provocative, or is there more going on to what he's saying? Let's take a look. Welcome to Books and Big Ideas, what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about, with Joel Wentz. Okay, I have here the new book that's made a little bit of a stir, Woke Racism by John McWhorter. John McWhorter is known, I think, at least the way I know him, is as a podcaster, conversation partner with Glenn Lowry. But he's also made the rounds through his own podcasts and lots of different talk shows and especially interviews regarding this new book. So I'll just want to go through my typical format, which is the main idea, the research, the readability, and the reasonableness of it. So first of all, the main idea is pretty straightforward, actually, and it's simply that anti-racism or popular anti-racism, especially what I call pop CRT, what I've called in some of my other videos popular CRT, critical race theory, that whole way of thinking, which is kind of under the term woke now, that whole way of thinking in McWhorter's argument is functioning like a religion. It's functioning like a belief system that has moral judgments and is held onto as a matter of belief and faith, and therefore is essentially invulnerable to rational discourse or to argumentation or persuasiveness through logic and reason. His take is that as it's functioning as a religion in that way, it is basically, invulnerable to honest, good faith, so to speak, discussion. So that's his argument, is that it's functioning as a religion in our cultural moment. And that's a bad thing. That's a very bad thing in his mind, that it's actually contributing to not just polarization, but the continuing fracturing of our society and our discourse. So yeah, that's the main idea. The research behind it. So this book overall, I'll say a bit on the readability. This book overall is a lot more popular level than I expected it to be. So it's not primarily about his research that he conducted to put together his argument. That being said, McWhorter he's a brilliant guy. He's very well read. He fluently quotes philosophers and historians and stuff that I was surprised to see. His specialty is linguistics, but he quotes freely outside of that field. So he's obviously very well read, very, very intelligent. And he's very aware of, he cites chapter and verse of things people are saying in the current discussion around race. So he's very, very informed as to what is going on in this cultural moment we're in. And so he brings a lot of his own kind of primary research, so to speak. Research wouldn't even be the way to necessarily put it, because it's a lot of people who tell him what's going on. So people approach him with information that he then gathers and has alluded to in this book. So, but that being said, it is a lot of his kind of personal things he's either encountered directly or things that he knows secondhand through other people he's connected to through his field. So, so yeah, it's not about the research in the traditional academic sense, but he does bring really a wealth of reading to it, and he does bring a lot of interesting anecdotes from his own personal experiences. Now the readability, I alluded to this a second ago, but it is. I almost read this in one sitting, which I was surprised about. It's very, very readable. It goes very smoothly. It reads more, honestly, it reads more like a long essay than a book per se. If you kind of know what that feels like, it feels like a long essay. And actually, kind of ironically, given the theme of religion and religious kind of argumentation in his argument, it actually, honestly, it felt to me a bit more like a sermon. It felt like a persuasive essay. It's very, very impassioned, which makes it partly more readable because you can feel his energy and his passion, how much he cares about what's going on. Although, if you don't like his perspective, that will probably grate on you even more because he is very passionate about it. But it's just very readable. It's honestly quite enjoyable to read. Given the provocative nature of it, given how charged the issue is, I found it really, really almost beautifully written, if that's a weird way to say. It's just, he's a linguist. He's very good with words. And so it's highly readable. So if you were worried about it being overly academic or impenetrable or something, it's not that at all. Don't worry about that at all. Very, very readable. And then finally, the reasonableness. Okay. This, of course, is what everyone wants to know about an argument like this that's so provocative and on such a lightning rod issue. I am extremely conflicted in my opinion about this book. I'm very, very torn. And I'll unpack that. I'm very torn because on the one hand, I resonate deeply with where he's coming from. Deeply. And I also have a really big problem with his main through line, which is comparing it to a religion. So that's why I'm torn. I'm very torn on this way he's put this argument together. So I'll unpack what I mean. I will start with what I liked. And then I'll end on what I wish he would have done differently. So what I am in agreement with, I actually am in agreement in broad strokes with his argument that pop CRT, so to speak, anti-racism, I'm in agreement that it is functioning with this religious moralizing force. There is this sense of moral crusade about having the right thoughts and the right perspective, and there's a sense about hubris in the sense of being on the right side of history with having the right ideas, and how that can morph into calling for conversion. And I've worked deeply in evangelical religious settings, in different organizations, so it feels very similar to the experiences I've had, experiences of calling for conversions, calling for repentance, calling for change of mind, celebrating when people change their mind, holding up testimonies and stories. I mean, all this stuff is the stuff of kind of popular evangelical type religion, and it all marks this anti-racism kind of rhetoric and dialogue. Well, not even really dialogue, more like monologues. So I'm very, very sympathetic and actually in agreement with a lot of what he's saying and what he's trying to point to with how it's functioning, and especially how it's shaping values and shaping minds, and also how it's inculcating fear in people who disagree. I've seen a lot of fear tactics used in religious circles. In my case, it was a lot of fear of damnation and condemnation, fear of hell, literally. It obviously uses different language, but man, it feels emotionally very similar. So he is truly onto something, and I really agree. In a way, I agree with him. Also, one other thing I want to say that I think he is 100% spot on with is he has this list at the beginning and then at the end. He repeats he has a list of 10 contradictions that are baked into anti-racism. It's things like, if you're white, you should be ready to, apologize at any given moment, but at the same time, you should not expect forgiveness because that's demanding labor from a person of color. Another one is, you should be interested in other cultures other than your own because that's how you dismantle white supremacy. But also, you shouldn't show too much interest because that's just colonial, stuff like that. But he has 10 broken down contradictions that are baked into this popular anti-racism that are spot on. I was almost having an emotional reaction as reading those 10 things because I've experienced them in different settings. So that's all my stuff I like, that I agree with, that I resonate with, that I think is right on, that's really helpful. Really glad that it's in this book. But man, oh man, I really wish, and you can tell he's not a scholar of religion. You can just tell, at least in my opinion, you can tell he's not a scholar of religion in the way he puts his argument together, because there's one core thing I really wish he would have done differently, and that's I wish he would have not so simplistically labeled everything as a religion under anti-racism. By that I mean I wish he would have nuanced between dogmatic or fundamentalistic religion and religion as such. He doesn't make that distinction, and so what ends up happening is his argument ends up taking on the flavor of there's enlightened non-religious people and then backwards religious people in the world, and that's almost how he kind of frames the whole thing up, is that anything that requires belief is to be shelved under religion, which is to be shelved under backwards. And that was really rankled me and was really frustrating to me. And I think you can tell that he is not a scholar, like I said, of either world religions or the history of religions, certainly not the history of Christianity, because some of the ways that he alludes to things you can just tell are a little simplistic. And so I think his argument would have been strengthened quite a bit by distinguishing between, like I said, dogmatic and fundamentalistic approaches to religion and religion itself. Because not all religions de facto function the way that he's talking about anti-racism functioning as. For example, for things like forgiveness, things like grace, things like redemption itself are deeply religious concepts that permeate lots of different religions in the world, and surely those concepts aren't all backwards automatically because they're religious, right? The concept of faith, the concept of claiming a conviction in something you cannot prove or see as an understanding of faith, that in itself is not just a simplistic, primitive, backwards concept. But as you read McWhorter, you'd think that anything that has a religious undertone to it is just by definition backwards and to be kind of relegated to the trash bin of history. And I've listened to him talk a lot, and I don't think he actually thinks that, but man, it's not clearly argued in this book. Maybe that's by virtue of him writing it too fast, or not, like I said, not being as versed in this topic of religion and religious thought. And that was my biggest frustration, and my frustration is strong with it because I think the other stuff he's saying that's right is so right and so important to be heard, and I wish it wasn't framed in this simplistic binary of religion and not religion. What I would say is that what he's putting his finger on is anti-racism functioning as fundamentalistic religion. I think that would be the better way to frame the argument and the truer way to frame it, that would not also just dismiss any and all things that could be categorized as religious. Because, again, things like, what I would argue, things like this popular anti-racism, they actually need some religious concepts like forgiveness, like grace, like mercy, like the hope of redemption, like eschatological justice. These things are, well, they get back to religious concepts, and people who are scholars of religion know how different religions have attacked and grasped and tried to define these things over the course of their systems of thinking. And I just think McWhorter's argument would be really, really strengthened by a dose of some of that expertise. So this is going on a little bit longer than I intended. I usually try to keep these under 10 minutes, but as you can tell, I had such conflicted, strong feelings about this book because of that tension that I just unpacked. So hopefully that was of help to you. If this is a book you've had your eye on, hopefully this gave you a sense of whether or not it might be worth reading. I would still recommend it, given all of my kind of caveats there about how he framed the argument. I definitely still recommend the book. I recommend wrestling with some of the ideas he sought, and especially if, like me, you've been immersed in both religious settings and in really, really hyper woke, left, progressive, anti-racist settings. If you've been immersed in both those settings, you're going to find a lot to resonate with in McWhorter's argument. And if nothing else, I'm really, really glad he, frankly, demonstrated the bravery of putting this out in the world in a publishing format, because I think this kind of perspective really, really needs to be given a seat at the table right now. So that's Woke Racism by John McWhorter, just a bit about it. I hope that you found something here interesting, thought-provoking, maybe even found a book that you'll sink some time into. So as always, thank you for watching.